Welcome back to another episode of the Development by David podcast. This week, your guest is me. I reached out to the wonderful world of Instagram, and you beautiful people provided me with tens of questions, some very invasive, some very surface level, some just funny. And I'm going to put a timer on for 40 minutes and answer as many as possible. I'm sorry if I don't answer your question. I'm just doing this completely off the cuff. I was going to prepare answers to these questions, but I realized that will catch me out as a podcast host or a podcast guest even. I just want to give you the raw emotional answer to each of these questions as if you asked me on the street. I don't want to hide behind a fabricated answer that sounds great on a podcast. I want you to get to know me as if you were having a conversation with me. So without further ado, let's get into it. First question. What's your story you spend so much time sharing others? Okay, it's going to be a really long answer to the first question, so if you don't want to hear my story, skip on like 5 minutes, okay? So I was born in Prestwick, which is a small town on the west coast of Scotland, a really, really beautiful part of the country, famously known for its airport and for being the home of open golf. In the neighbouring town my dad grew up, he was the oldest of six. He had a paper round and milk run from the age of 9 till 13. He shared his bedroom with his six siblings, or five siblings, sorry, there were six of them. And they didn't have a duvet. They wore workwear jackets to keep them warm at night. They were the definition of living in poverty, essentially. Imagine Willy Wonka, but based in Scotland. It was like that. Kilmarnock at the time was notably known as the most deprived in Scotland. BBC have made documentaries about the place subsequently. My mum, similarly, grew up in a really working class background. She was the youngest of six. And that led her to be natively hardwired, complacent, and cushioned, being the youngest child. She never moved out until her mid-30s, making her an older mother. Mom and dad got together. They had me and a twin, unexpectedly. I was born premature, and my twin, he didn't quite make it. So they were heartbroken at that moment in time. They didn't have any money. They had to sell their house. I grew up with parents in and out of employment throughout my entire childhood. They both suffered mental health conditions, my mum having anxiety, my dad having PTSD and depression. My dad's PTSD came from being in the army, essentially. He guarded Buckingham Palace, fought in the Falklands, attended Princess Diana's wedding as a guard, has a combination of bravery for saving lives in a London fire. He is a bit of a hero, but has experienced a lot of trouble in his life, including the loss of his father when he was in his 20s, losing his brother through a suicide, and losing a child of my twin through a premature death. So they had me, and I was born 6 or 8 weeks premature. I was born around 2 pounds. I was the size of my dad's hand. I was in an incubator for months and months and months until my mum and dad could take me home. My mum almost died giving birth to me. They really struggled taking care of me. When I was a baby, they didn't have any money. It was quite a tough time. I grew up on free school meals and clothing grants from the army and EMA, if anyone knows what education maintenance allowance is. We just didn't have much, and I was really grateful for all the small things that I did have. But when I was around 11, I was selling tablet and fudge around the streets, trying to make some money. And my uncle, who was the only role model, or distant role model at the time, who worked in a bank somewhere, said to me, "David, you're good at counting that money. You could be an accountant. They make a lot of money." And for me, I heard the jackpot sound effect. I thought, well, all my mum and dad's problems, especially their mental health problems, derive from financial difficulty. I could be an accountant and I could help them with that. So I self-predicated my entire schooling on business and accountancy. I did an open university course when I was 15 or 16 called Introduction to Accountancy Bookkeeping. I hassled every local firm for work experience to do this, and they said nah. So I did my work experience, or my initial bout of work experience, at the train station cafe, selling hot rolls, and I made £20 that week, and I felt rich. I then got in contact with the Social Mobility Foundation, a charity that makes practical improvements in the life of young people through bridging the networking gap, through giving them career advice and CV workshops, and ultimately giving them access to opportunity. My opportunity was to visit KPMG, the multinational accountancy firm in London, and that was essentially the first time I had left Scotland. First time I wore a suit. I thought an accountant was a rich, middle-class, middle-aged man with grey hair in a suit. Turns out that's not the case. And because I got the taste of a metropolis, I guess, or a taste of the city life, or I could see people much like me in a position that I wanted to be in. Um, that work experience really, really gave me a tunnel vision. So I joined that firm as an apprentice in 2017, and I'm still there. Um, when I joined as an apprentice, I rotated around different departments: audit, tax, and advisory, and I then became Scotland's first apprentice management consultant. At the same time, I volunteered in the social mobility space. Social mobility is the movement of people through social strata enabled by education or employment. My definition of social mobility is the amount of ease or friction between an individual and their access and awareness to opportunity. It's essentially the movement of people coming from a lower privileged background or a less privileged background or a less socioeconomic advanced background to a higher status in that respect, or vice versa. It can be reverse. So I started volunteering in that space because I was very lucky to get into an organization that I could only dream of getting into. And subsequently, I helped build our social mobility network at KPMG, which looks to make a practical improvement in our policies and our recruitment and our retention. We have 700 members signed up. That led me on to speaking to Her Majesty the Queen in 2020, being featured in the Business Insider 35 under 35, and ultimately starting this podcast. So that's kind of roadmap to date. Hopefully that was succinct enough and under 5 hours. So second question, do you have sponsors on the podcast? Typically, no, but I have had a few. If you're interested in sponsoring this podcast up front before the conversation takes place, reach out to me. I would happily consider it. Third question, what's the BTS, behind the scenes, like of meeting your guests? Now you have celebs and untouchables. Untouchables, that's a good one. There's a dichotomy. My nerves during a podcast are predicated on how well the intro chat is. So obviously, when I do these virtual podcasts or even in-person podcasts, we chat before I hit record. And you have two types of people. You have guests who who know they're doing you the favor. Their time is precious. They're perhaps carving this out of their workday. They don't have any questions. They don't make any preamble chat. They just want to hit record and go. And when that occurs, and an example of that is Seth Godin, right? One of my heroes. It's very nerve-wracking because you can't sit into the conversation. It's very transactional. You have a set of questions or topics that you just want to draw out of them, and they know that. Whereas if I have a guest on and the preamble chat is getting to know each other and learning about the premise of the podcast and why and understand their motivations for coming on the podcast, you can really sit in and have a conversation as if it was over a coffee or in person. So another example of that is Rory Sutherland. I didn't even have that preamble chat. As soon as he came into the lobby of the video conferencing software, I just hit record because he just started, and it's my most played episode, and I felt most comfortable in that episode. He is a Cambridge alumni, the face of modern behavioural science. Someone like me shouldn't feel comfortable talking to someone like him, yet it was my favourite episode in terms of enjoyment when recording. So that was that was predicated on the dynamic that he brought and the non-transactional relationship that he expected. Fourth question, best guest. Look, that's like trying to pick a favourite child. Each guest has added to my life in a different way, has added to my perspective and my worldview in a different way. It's like asking someone what their favourite book is, right? This is a good example of this. And some people will be able to rhyme off a favourite book. Books speak to you at a certain period of time. A book that you could have read could not land with much impact because you weren't ready to receive that information based on the scenario and environment that you were in at that moment in time. That's similar to me with guests, right? Guests have spoken to me in periods where I've needed it. For example, I had a gentleman called Chris Reeve on, really upfront, maybe in my first 5 episodes, right? And the premise of that podcast was to speak about grief and losing a mother. And I just came out of losing a mother, so that spoke to me at a very relevant moment in my life. Now that I'm kind of through that journey, that episode doesn't speak to me the same because the context of the conversation is not relevant to the hardships and emotions that I'm going through right now. So long answer short, I don't have a best guess. They're also great. Or else I wouldn't have had them, right? Someone said, "Yes, buzz for this. Thank you." What's your gym routine? Oh, good question. I have just finished a photo shoot with my coach, Lewis McFarlane Coaching, and we are now just continuing that practice of having really great discipline, having great habits, and my actual gym routine is kind of push pull leg style, if you're familiar with that. So the pushing motions in the gym, and all the pulling motions in the gym, and then all the leg motions in the gym. I do cardio. Most days I do around 1,500 calories of cardio a day. Not a day, a week. Oh my god, not a day. How many calories are you currently eating? Around 1,900. I think I'm on 200 grams of carbs, 180 grams of protein, and around 54 grams of fat. Are you happy right now? I think this is a really contentious question with a really contentious answer. I think striving for overall happiness as a life goal is overrated and met with dissatisfaction. What I mean by that is it's so arbitrary to be happy all the time. A really great quote that I love is that you shouldn't aim to be happy, you should aim to feel the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time. I think a better life goal is regret minimization. Living consciously that each action that you take every single day is a vote for the person that you become. So when you become 60, a lot of your makeup is predicated on the actions that you've taken in your 20s, 30s, 40s. So my biggest fear is to have regret at 60, to not have pursued a side hustle, to not have visited a new country, to have not moved out of the family home. All those micro moments you can imagine will have a reciprocal effect on your psyche at the age of 60. So for me, I have a decision making model of when I'm posed with an opportunity, will I regret doing this or not doing this? And hopefully that moves me forward to actualizing some sort of happiness as an indirect result of that. What are your genuine ambitions in life? It's quite simple. I want to be able to live on in other people once I go. Yes, you can't live forever. Maybe having a legacy is somewhat overrated because you're not there to experience it. But I really hope that someone somewhere continues to talk about me once I go because I've touched their life in a positive manner. What's been your biggest growth moment? I would probably say burning out in April because I was balancing too many things. I was going through a period of professional exams with my Chartered Institute of Management and Accounting course. I was coming out of quite a depressive episode in my life. I was trying to balance high level podcast guests while maintaining a day job, whilst also trying to keep healthy habits like the gym, etc., etc. And I crashed and burned. I was unable to get out of bed some days. I was breaking promises and habits with myself. I had really, really poor inner monologue. The way I spoke to myself was almost suicidal. Not in the sense that I would have committed suicide, because I know I would not, but the way in which I was speaking to myself was just hyperbolic and unnecessarily helpful. Sorry, unnecessarily unhelpful. I was saying things such as, would people miss you if you were gone? How many people would show up at your funeral? Would people make a fuss about you if you disappeared? And that was because that self-worth and lack of self-worth was derived from balancing too many things. And because I was balancing so many different things, I was incapable of meeting spec on all of them. By balancing so many things, you're guaranteed to fail at one of them. And because I failed at one of them, all of those factors had a reciprocal downfall effect. And because I was not maintaining a high level of quality across my life, I would mirror that within my internal monologue. You're a loser. You're lacking purpose. You're not fulfilling your goals. You're not moving forward, you're moving backward, you're being stagnant, you're being average. And I realized that the biggest lesson from that was that subtraction is the greatest productivity tool. Removing things that don't move you towards your North Star, that you do perhaps as a distraction or as a impulsivity, those things, by subtracting them, give you other time, gives you more time to move forward to the things that are going to propel you to that North Star. So by subtracting things such as toxic relationships, toxic habits with my phone, taking a break on my studies because I wasn't that those studies weren't fulfilling me in the way my podcast was fulfilling me. Removing those items allowed me to apply myself and accelerate in the other modalities. What keeps you up at night? Nothing. I sleep so well. I'm really, really grateful of that. Would you go back 10 years if it meant giving up what you've built, both career and podcast? I heard someone say that a billionaire said when he was 20, he wanted to be a billionaire. When he was a billionaire, he wanted to be 20. So, yeah, I would go back 10 years to being 14 again. Um, and the fact that I've managed to have a really great career that I'm fulfilling, and I've managed to literally interview my heroes, the fact that I've ticked that box, of course, I would love to go back 10 years and do something completely different. That's a no brainer. What's the goal in life tangibly? Location, job, relationships, etc. So I don't see myself living in the west coast of Scotland for my entire life. I do want to be nomadic in the sense that I have lived in numerous locations. My dream job, um, perhaps being the CEO or founder of a foundation and growing this podcast essentially to a point that it could be a full-time job. So either one of those, I think that would satisfy my North Star of doing good for others. Relationships, I would love to be a dad one day, just not quite yet. I do want to experience the single life in order for me to gain the knowledge and understanding of preferences. So when I make a kind of investment in a long-term relationship, I know that I've made the right one and I don't have any regrets or tendencies or impulsivities or desires to be with someone else because I haven't tried something different. Biggest thing that grief taught you? What a question. So for those who don't know, I lost my mum in 2020 very suddenly, um, through a heart attack. Unfortunately, I had to witness the whole process of that happening in my house. And yeah, it was a very traumatic experience, as you can imagine. And I'm 2 years on in that journey. So things that it taught me, things that losing my mum in 2020 taught me. Hmm. It's very cliched, but life is short. I had this predisposition that my mum would be around till I was 50 and that I would have the opportunity to treat her, spoil her, spend time with her. So I would backload that expectation. I would bypass on coffees or walks or movies in the house or dinners together because I was saving up for some grander experience in the future. I thought I could bank these memories and pay them all off, or I could take them out as loans and pay them all off when I'm 30, 40. I don't need to go on a walk with her because I'll take her on holiday in 2 years. I don't need to go for a coffee because I'll treat her really well for her 65th birthday. These things never happen. I was never able to cash in those checks because I lost her so early on. So one of the biggest things that it taught me was not to overlook and underprice the micro moments that you can have with parents. And that can be as simple as a gab on the couch with a coffee. I felt so propelled in my career to make it or break it and to lean into the day job and to stay late and to study that bit more or podcast that bit extra or go to the gym for another 30-minute session. just because I thought those things would move the needle closer to a person that I wanted to become that could treat my mum to greater things. Unfortunately, that never got to happen. So that's one thing that it taught me. The second thing is my mum lived a very, very lonely life. She was unemployed. She stayed at home whilst I worked, whilst my sister was at uni in Edinburgh, whilst my dad worked. So she spent a lot of time alone, and no one came to visit her. Friends didn't pop in. She never got messages or visits from relatives. But when she passed, her entire funeral was packed to the brim. I could have sold tickets. And that showed me that she was so well respected, so well loved and cherished as a woman. However, she didn't know that. She could only ever gauge that by how many people would show up and visit her, and that was none. But if she could see her funeral attendance, then perhaps the anxiety that she had in her earlier life would have been eradicated by this sense of self-worth and external validation to the world. So for a lesson that I took away from that was that don't underestimate your legacy. Just because people are not reaching out directly and telling you how great you're doing and how much you mean to them doesn't mean you're not doing great and you don't mean anything to them. It's human nature to keep things in. We don't share appreciation for everything that adds value to our day. Like, when was the last time you went and enjoyed a coffee in a coffee shop and then subsequently went up to the barista and said, "That was really great, thank you"? Or you got a moment of solace from a friend who gave you really great advice and you said thanks in the moment, but 4 weeks later, did you go back and say thank you for really adding to my day? When was the last time you read an Instagram post that inspired you, but you directly DM'd the content creator and thanked them for what they wrote? Never. But that funeral, seeing so many people turn up in a moment of crisis, really showed me how much of an impact that you can have but never hear about it. What made you start a podcast? So growing up, I didn't have role models in the realms in which I wanted to achieve in. I had really great role models broadly, like my dad, a hero, a veteran, but I didn't want to be in the army. I didn't want to be in the military. My cousins had really great businesses, but they were very blue-collar jobs. They were very successful, but I didn't want to be a joiner. I couldn't be a joiner. I was hopeless. So I looked online. I looked online at content creators and podcasters. And at the time, they were outlaying business principles and self-development principles, but not in an accent that I recognized, and they used language that was above my head. Thankfully, I was well read enough to kind of digest as much as possible and consume it into my own worldview and spit that back out. However, I realized that people from my background might not be able to do that. So when I started pioneering some work in the social mobility space, I really wanted to create an online directory of role models. So that's why the premise of the podcast is to use origin stories as a self-development tool. Do you have a relationship? Nope, I'm single at the moment. That's not me advertising, by the way. Please do not message me because I get nervous. No, I'm only joking. No one will message me anyway, it's fine. How do you spend your money? I'm really, really fortunate that based on my background, I earn a great amount for someone at my age. I'm really, really privileged of that. But you'll see me in the street and I won't wear designer brands. I won't flash out on material objects, but I do spend a lot of my money on this podcast. Like, there's costs that go into this, like going into the studio and stuff. I pay freelancers to develop some of my highlights and trailer content. I also love coffees and really decadent foods and snacks on work days when I'm out. But the majority of my money goes into experiences. I've been like 3 or 4 holidays this year. Every time I go on holiday, I do excursions. I'm going to a festival in a couple of weeks. I went skydiving this year that cost a lot of money. For me, I won't. So going back to that regret minimization point being my overarching goal, right? I want to live a life where at 60 or 70 or 80, I don't have any regrets. Spending money on materialistic objects for the benefit of other people, or to signal my worth to society through these material objects as vehicles, that will be a huge regret when I'm 60. I won't remember the Gucci sweater that I had or the Rolex that I wore, but I will remember the time I jumped out of a plane at 15,000 feet in Algarve, which was a fraction of the price of a Gucci jumper, right? So I spend most of my money on experiences to remember. Second question after that was, did you skydive and how was it? Yes, you might have saw it through my Instagram or my LinkedIn. Um, Skydiving is like having a panic attack in midair and having the oxygen from your lungs removed whilst having it. Um, I was not scared at all though. I was really comfortable with the concept of death. I don't know why. I really don't know why. I really learned a lot about anxiety though. I realized when I was climaxing in terms of altitude in the plane that I'm not scared about the skydive itself. I'm not anxious about that. I'm anxious about a fatality that might or might not happen. When I jumped out the plane and I was free falling, I wasn't anxious. That was removed. So I learned that anxiety is about a situation. It occurs when you're thinking about a situation in the future that might or might not happen. When you're present and doing the thing that once scared you, you're not anxious. So, yep, skydiving was awesome. I think I was free falling for like 120 seconds. It feels like one of those drop zones at a roller coaster park or a theme park, but the constant feeling is where you're going down and down and down and down instead of up, down, left, and right. You know what I mean? No, it was awesome. Strategy for a first date: assume attraction is the best strategy that I have. Assume that the person that you are meeting already is attracted to you. That mental model will allow you to present the version of yourself that you think is most attractive. You will present the traits, the quirks, the jokes that you think are most attractive because you have already closed the sale. You don't have to win them over mentally because you already think that they are attracted to you. And I think that's a lesson that you can take on in business. You can meet people who are more senior than you or podcast guests that are more prolific than you. And if you assume that they have as much value to receive from you as you do them, you will go in presenting yourself in a better light. Since your last Q&A, your podcast has blown up. What do you attribute it to? I wouldn't say it's blown up, but it has scaled in terms of the profile of guests and the amount of countries in which it is played in. I mean, it did chart number 47 in the GB charts and self-improvement, which was great, but it hasn't blown up. It's just done relatively better in a consistent manner. And that's due to compound interest, right? You do something long enough, you make enough noise, someone will hear it. If I did one really great podcast 6 months later or 12 months later after that Q&A, nothing would have really changed. Even if it was interviewing Ronaldo or absolute A-lister, right? What has contributed to its consistent growth is the consistency in which I have shown up in, which is a weekly basis. I'm making very, 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 very small steps consistently, week on, week out. And over time, that's compounded into what seems from the outside in a massive step. I think the driver of the guest that I've had on is predicated on signaling. So to get really great guests on in the future, I need to signal what guests I've had on in the past. The first very big guest I had on was the founder of Reebok, Joe Foster, who I just recently recorded part 2 with. Everybody knows who Reebok is. They know it through the sneakers or the trainers that they see on people's feet. They see it through the UFC partnerships. It's hallmarked into existence, at least in British fashion, right? So I could signal my self-worth through that brand because I had the founder on. As soon as I was able to do that, I could cash that in for reward with the next guest I wanted on. I could have another retail brand come on the podcast because I could say, look, I've had the founder of Reebok. Why can't I have Umbro, Nike, Adidas? Not that I've had those on, but I could cash that in for reward in the same respect. Similarly, I just cashed in that brand to, I don't know who came after that, but I've had numerous great guests thereafter. I then cashed them in for the next guest and so on and so on. So, for example, I had Logan Ury, the Hinge director of relationships, right? In my application for her to come on as a guest, I had to answer to her who I had on before, and I had other well-respected behavioral designers and psychologists and scientists like Rory Sutherland, Seth Godin, Nir Eyal. So being able to cash in on their status allowed me to get them on. So that's how those two factors, consistent growth, consistent actions, and being able to signal previous guests have been the two main drivers of its huge step in terms of presence online. What started your journey towards getting properly in shape? So I've excelled or consciously tried to excel in most domains of my life, whether that's career, podcast, self-development, and volunteering. And I'm really, really grateful that because of that drive to do so, I have excelled and ticked off achievements that I would only have dreamed of achieving in some of these spaces. And yes, of course, I feel like an imposter and I don't feel like I deserve most of them. However, I realized that I could hide behind my poor confidence and my fitness and body by rebuttaling it with the excuse that, oh, well, I'm doing so well in these other factors in my life. I was blue pilling myself out of shape. I could make so many excuses up to why I had love handles and why I didn't like taking my top off on holiday. And I realized that usually the things that you're hiding from are the things that you need to work on. So I reached out to my good friend Lewis McFarlane Coaching, and he, as a friend, said, David, you know what? I've recognized this in you for a very long time. Let's see how being in shape can accelerate and complement those other facets of your life. So I did a 90-day photo shoot challenge, got abs again for the first time, and went out of my comfort zone and did a photo shoot with my coach, Lewis McFarlane. And thankfully, that process has given me a greater self-confidence, a greater ability to present myself and hold myself with my chest puffed and to be confident more in social situations. And it's given me a real sense of routine and discipline. What's your favourite book? Reverting back on my previous point about what's my favourite guest or who's been my favourite guest, I don't have a favourite book, but some of the notable ones that I do enjoy are The Formula by Albert Laszlo Barabasi, The Forgotten Highlander by Alistair Urquhart. What else? The Dip by Seth Godin. How Not to Die Alone by Logan Ury was great. Alchemy by Rory Sutherland. What else? The Almanac of Naval Ravikant by Eric Georgeson. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that name right. Atomic Habits by James Clear, of course. Deep Work by Cal Newport. When do you plan on coming to Australia for a business trip? Get it set up. Someone in Australia really wants me to come visit them, of course. I'd love to go to Australia. I'd love to live in Melbourne. Hopefully at some point in my life I'll do like a secondment out there for a couple of years. Long-term plans for your podcast, when to cut day job. Look, I've absolutely achieved everything and more with this podcast. It's not a Joe Rogan level podcast. It's not a Diary of the CEO, but I've spoke to some of the most fascinating people that little me from my council house should never have been able to talk to. And the podcast and the listeners, you guys, honestly, you've enabled this for me. You have literally given me 12-year-old David's dream. It's all because of you. Maybe if you didn't listen, I would never have continued this on. And the fact that you have stuck around and shared your love and tuned in and given me recommendations, maybe the fact that you've done that has been the golden thread that's allowed me to keep this going and grow it to a point where I can speak to literally people that I was once inspired by. So thank you so much for actualizing this for me. I would love to make it a day job, of course I would, but podcasting doesn't pay millions like you might see Joe Rogan receiving, right? Those are anomalies. They're superstar runaway successes. But what does make me feel rich is the conversations with idols that I get to have. What niche topics are you still looking to discuss with an expert on the podcast? I'd love to learn more about the gaming industry. I'd love to learn more about the porn industry. I'd love to speak about space and Geography, these are all facets that I'm so undereducated on. So by having an expert on the podcast, it would allow me to at least get a foundational level of knowledge, and hopefully the listeners can receive the same. Do you use dating apps? Opinion on them? No, I don't use dating apps. I did create a Hinge the other day to create a profile so I could screenshot it for my episode with Logan Yuri. But besides that, I don't find it a useful way to meet people. Perhaps casually, for casual encounters, yeah, of course it would be useful. But I don't think you could find a life partner on that app. Do you think your social media profile is a true representation of yourself in real life? I don't think anybody's is, but I like to think mine is as accurate as possible in the common day. I think I am as authentic as I can really come across. Like I will not show you the days where I can't get out of bed. Of course I won't. I won't show you the days where I feel low in self-worth. I won't show the days where I skip the gym, right? But I try and vocalize some of the hardships that I go through, as much as possible. Why are you single? You tell me. If you could have any job in the world, what would it be and why? I'd love to be a stand-up comedian. I just think the ability to make so many people feel one emotion in unison is such a superpower. Um, Comedians are greatly idolized as well. I think you'd get so much fulfillment from being a comedian. And if you're a superstar in that realm, you do get paid a lot, but that's not why I would do it. What weak point in your life do you want to work on improving in the rest of the year? My ability to convey a message in as few words as possible. You've probably learned already from this podcast that I can ramble on a single token, right? I'm not very succinct to my answers. I can't limit the amount of words that I use to convey a representation of ideas. So I want to be able to answer a question in as few words or syllables as possible. Hypothetically, what single regret in your 20s could you not live with when you turn 30? This is my favorite question so far. My biggest response to that would be tying myself to a single domain. And that could be a career, that could be a relationship, that could be a location. I want to be able to explore all my desires or as many desires as I can in those three factors as much as possible before I'm 30. My premise, my North Star, my goal in life is to have regret minimization. I can only achieve that if I have a full flavor of different experiences. Let's use let's use the example of a relationship. This might sound bizarre, but I want the wife that I marry in my 30s to be thankful that I have dated in my 20s. Because that means that by choosing her and settling with her in my 30s, I have experienced so many different tastes, traits, backgrounds, ages, careers, qualities in other people that I have been able to recognize her great ones. And conversely, I hope that the wife that I marry has done the exact same. I hope she has been with a 6'5" Asian, tall, well-groomed man and and didn't like it, and that wasn't her type, or has had someone who is very politically driven and traditional and dogmatic in certain beliefs, and she hasn't liked it. I hope that she has tried so many different wider experiences, whether it's travel or careers too, that settling with me and the environment in which we do so, I hope that that is such a calculated decision based on previous patterns and experiences. So for me, I want to explore the pottery curiosity that I have, or I don't know, the tendency to want to try stand up or skydiving or volunteering in South America. I want to fulfill as many of these desires as possible so that when I settle in my 30s, I am I'm minimizing as many regrets and desires as possible. What character trait of yours are you most proud of that didn't come naturally? Growing up, I was quite a poor listener. I don't know if it was because of the tendencies of my dad. He seemed to be someone that was always the focal point of a conversation. He would always have the last sentence. It was almost like top trumps when you were having a conversation with him. He wanted to be the authority figure. As a byproduct, he wasn't a great listener. He would listen to respond, not listen to engage. And through osmosis, I embodied that trait. I realized in conversations, all I wanted to do was let them respond and reply with a fact or statistic or anecdote that overpowered their emotional anecdote, right? And to be a really great podcaster, you need to be able to open the sale, not close the sale. You need to be able to be a great listener and give people the space to have their own revelations. A lot of the guests will come on and share their story and have a aha moment. That's why that occurred, or aha, this is a lesson that I've learned from X failure, right? The listeners as well. I could I could ask a guest a question, have them provide a personal anecdote, and then for me to overlay that with a huge statistic or concept or framework, right? But that disallows the listener to have their own revelation, their own understanding of the question asked and the answer received. So for me, when there's times where a guest outlays a really great emotional response, a skill that I have learned is to be able to remove myself from overpowering that with um, my ego. Are there other things you consider to try to pursue as a passion in the future? I keep mentioning it, but I'd love to try stand-up comedy. I don't think I'm that funny, right? Like my mates say I'm quite funny. I've got quite a dark sense of humor, and I'm able to make light of really dark personal circumstances that I've found myself in. Grief being one of them, right? But I think stand-up comedians have such. I think they're overlooked in terms of their intelligence, right? Like you look at the funny person in the room and you think they're a disruptor and you think they're the class clown and you don't think they're the intelligent one in the room. But I really think comedians, regardless of background or education, are one of the most intellectual group of people that you can come across. They have to like convey a really powerful, relevant message wrapped round with a bubble of comedy. Like that's so hard to do, to marry those two things. When you see comedians make commentary on political aspects or on current affairs, like how the hell do you make light of some of these situations, right? I think it's such an amazing skill to do, especially the improv work they do with the crowd as well. Like imagine being able to hear someone's elevator pitch and be able to cohesively create a sense of laughter in a room based on their job or their relationship status or their background. I think that's just a that level of improvisation would serve me on my podcast and serve me in a business context. Advice to a young man trying to find himself. The biggest piece of advice I can give a young man, and I'm going to give an age range to this, 16 or 17 or 18, right? Between that realm of age. That's a moment in time where you're expected to make an informed decision based on limited life experience. Usually you're expected to choose what university you go to or what job that you enter after school. These are really, if you're within the system or within the matrix, you're expected to see out an apprenticeship or see out a university course that takes 4 years. Right? We have sunk cost fallacy at that age. We start university or start this job and think, well, I'm 1 year in or 2 years in, I must stick it out. My biggest piece of advice is that at that age, you take a year out and try podcasting for 3 months or spend some money getting your personal trainer qualification or become a skydiving instructor. Just try these very obscurely different things so then you can make an informed decision based on more life experience on what you want to do, whether that's a job or a university course or a location in which you live in. I think you should spend that time doing numerous things, failing often, just never failing big, and using that to make an informed decision on what you want to do for the rest of your life. Try as many things as you can within your financial constraints. Shout out to Colin Campbell for this great question. What is your strategy for learning? My strategy for learning is a four-step process that I created. The first step of that process is to consume information that you are curious about. Curiosity, I believe, is the epicenter of learning. I think by having an emotion attached to the concepts and the information that you are consuming, I think there is a greater propensity for you to acknowledge it and digest it. So, yep, find information that you're curious about. I think the second step is to converse that information that you learn in circles in which support it and are also curious about it. So find friends that also share that passion, or find an expert in that field and have a conversation about it with them. By doing that, their concepts that they've learned, their worldview bleed into yours. It reflavors your own mindset and your own understanding of those principles. I think the third step is to journal and meditate on that idea or those principles, write it down, reflect on them, really, 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 really digest it and apply it to your own circumstances and environment and understanding. So the last step would be to action. Like literally, do as you've learned. Whether that's, I don't know, your driving theory test, for example, right? Like no matter if you had read the um, highway code front to back and you learnt it word for word, I would still not get in a car with you unless you had your driver's license. So the same goes for this principle. Everything that you've learned and the conversations that you've had and the original ideas that you've meditated on, they don't mean anything unless you action them. So the fourth step to that is to stick it into practice and fail with it. And then go back to step one, learn more information, talk about the information, meditate on the information, and retry. And that follows the principle of being an intellectual athlete that Naval Ravikant once spoke about. He says that we are intellectual animals in the sense that we should, but don't, perform, rest, reassess, train, perform, rest, reassess, train, perform, in that order, right? So that kind of fulfills that concept. Proudest achievement to date. I think my proudest achievement to date is meeting the Queen, because someone like me from my background seems a million miles away from speaking with the Queen. It's something that you would close your eyes as a child and only dream of. The reason it's so important to me is because during lockdown, when I had a really poor mental health status because of losing my mum and just lockdown more generally, I picked up gratitude journaling, and within that there was a line of writing down a positive affirmation, and I wrote down every single day, I will be a leader recognized by society for their impact on the community. And I fulfilled that by speaking to Her Majesty the Queen. So being able to actualize a goal that I only ever saw as a goal in a pipe dream during the pandemic, being able to actualize that during the pandemic, and it being a goal that is universally understood. Everyone knows who the Queen is, right? Being able to project that to the world and having recognition for that was something that meant a lot to me during that time. What are your personal symptoms of depression? So I need to preface this by saying I've never suffered from depression. I have been depressed. I've had a bad mental state, but never depression. So there's two components of this for me. The first one is a framework that I use called intent or distract. I typically try and gauge my habits and activities with a framework. And this framework allows me to understand whether I'm doing it for a positive outcome or I'm doing it to distract myself from a negative scenario or experience. So let me use the example of screen time. Am I using my phone to move me forward closer to a goal that will make me happy? For example, am I consuming podcast material? Am I emailing guests? Am I creating content for the podcast? Or am I on TikTok mindlessly scrolling? Another example of this is when I wake up, am I sleeping in longer because I need that rest, because my body is tired? Or am I sleeping in because I don't want to face reality? I don't want to face my day. I don't want to consume my own thoughts, so it's easier to sleep them off. So using that framework of intent or distract and being able to gauge how many more activities am I doing with intent versus how many I'm doing to distract, understanding that balance is a clear indicator for me whether I'm in a depressive episode or not. The second component of that is my inner monologue. So your inner monologue is the way in which you speak to yourself. Think about it like a roommate, right? And for me, if I'm feeling depressed or going through a depressive episode, I have a really noisy inner roommate or a really noisy roommate. And you need to learn how to love those conversations or change the fucking roommate. So if I'm talking to myself in a way, like I said before, that I call myself a loser or ask how many people would show up in my funeral, that's indicative of a poor mental state. Whereas if my inner monologue is euphoric and nostalgic and promotive and it's conversation with me, then that seems like I've got schizophrenia, but everyone does have an inner monologue. If I am recognizing how great my day is through the conversations I'm having with myself in my own head, that's a amazing sign of positive mental health. So for me, it's how you speak to yourself internally and the propensity in which you're distracting from your real life every day. Last question. How much are you looking forward to vibing in the Adjuna sunshine? So I'm going to Anjuna Deep, the open air festival in London in September. I'm joining my best mate Lewis McFarlane and the Caps brothers, Joe and Sam Caps. Sam has been on the podcast. They're from Norwich, and some of their friends from Norwich. Anjuna Deep is a really meaningful record label to me. I listen to all their artists, and I typically listen to them whilst I'm working on a creative endeavor, whether I'm at the gym or whether I'm trying to get through something really quite difficult, whether it's a personal low light or a career low light or a studying low light. And that one record label has got me through so much. It's very euphoric, deep house music, and I really, really can't wait to lose my Anjuna Deep virginity in London in September and see all their amazing artists live with such an amazing group of brothers. I just can't wait for it. So that's it. Podcast is done. Solo podcast number 2. Thank you for all the amazing questions. I did miss so many. I'm tight for time today, but I will answer some of the other ones on the next one. Let me know if you enjoyed this. Let me know if it was a great insight to me. Let me know what you disagree on. Let me know how you'd answer some of these questions differently. Let me know what points you did agree on. And let me know if you'd want me to do this again. Thank you for making it this far and listening to my rambling and listen to me work out my own thoughts in real time. It really does mean the world. Let me know what you think of it, and I'll see you on the next one.